I'd just like to take this opportunity to welcome our next two speakers. Our first speaker, which for us in the Māori world is one of our First Nation sisters from Australia, is Timmah Ball, and she's going to tell you about her world and her work. And then after that, we've got Rebecca Keddle, who I met in a railway station in London 10 years ago. But that's a whole other story, and I don't think she's talking about it today. But it's a great privilege to be working with the calibre of these kinds of Indigenous designers in this world. So I look forward to how they're going to present and what they're going to present, and I welcome Timmah to the stage.
Thank you for that introduction. I just want to begin by acknowledging and paying my respect to my Māori sisters. It's just been incredible that you've invited me here. It's a huge privilege. I also want to acknowledge that we're gathered here on land that is iwi land, and I just want to pay respect to all Māori mob who are in the room. I also want to pay respect to my own Balladong Noongar family all the way over other side of the sea and Australia in York, near Perth. And I think for me today, broadly speaking, we're looking at the rise of black design and decolonisation in cities like Auckland and Melbourne or Naarm. And for me, I thought it would be really important to present in a way that connects to my own culture. Aboriginal people have a huge history of oral storytelling. So instead of doing, I guess, a more standard presentation, I thought I would do some storytelling. So I'm going to share a poem, and I'm also going to read a section of a narrative essay. But by all means, if you want more technical planning, landscape architecture, by trade, I'm an urban planner, I'm more than happy in a Q&A to talk about more technical, professional details. I'm also going to show some images that should just keep playing on loop. And they're a visual portrayal of Melbourne, or Naarm, which is the Woiwurrung name for Melbourne. And they show what I think is a really interesting transition from a colonial city. So this is what Naarm looked like after settlement, or well, probably quite advanced 50 years on from settlement, first settlement when the sudden introduction of European British-style buildings were in the city. And I guess I'm wanting to show the subtle transition of how black design, Aboriginal architects are slowly inserting their values and principles into the city. But also, as you'll probably see in my presentation, there's a little bit of a critique. I'm interested in what black design means to all communities and which Aboriginal people are benefiting from the rise of public art by black artists in cities. So I'm going to start by reading a poem, Not Dead Yet. The architect enters the room, wearing a black velvet blazer, crisp white shirt, skinny leg jeans, a caricature oozing Starchitect cool. He's won the tender to design an Aboriginal health centre. He's saving our lives, one commission at a time. He promises community engagement, Indigenous design through collaborative consultation. Hand in hand we'll reconcile. Treaty unsigned, another scrap in the pile. The meeting starts. MacBook Airs charged, iPhones on silent. His portable projector boldly animates the wall with technical drawings, gum leaves and kangaroo paw. His young assistant smiles with eyes that beguile, their knees uncomfortably close, and a suffocating power clenches the room. His presentation ends on a photo, a black hand holding a white hand, 'cause it's all okay. Nothing ever happened here, they say. Mob gently start to share their stories, but the loudest voices are white. The complexity of colonisation erased, although a white council officer knowledgeably explains that the design should reflect the river. White voices drown out community who sit silently by the end. I guess they speak better about us than we ever can. The Starchitect leaves smugly, muttering how he likes to explore Australia's deep cultural dimension, another project to boast about, bringing cred and status to his illustrious career. The health centre's vital, but no one can guarantee There'll be free services for those in need. Back in my office, I sit at my desk. On the 35th floor, my window lingers on the William Barrack building. An Aboriginal leader, designed by a white man, gazes down Swanston Street. Moving through the city, other identities thrive on the periphery. Street art by Lisa Kennedy on an old postbox in Burke Street, and a torn Gary Foley poster clinging to the railway underpass. Fierce fighting alive, denied a spot in the public eye. And I wonder if a living blackface could ever exist on a 31-storey building. 'Cause whose land is it anyway? A bunch of white academics from RMIT proclaim. Another urban planning conference on the way. Colonial property rights will be erased. Alternative living, squats and co-housing, yarning circles and lemon myrtle flavours, the new themes of our progressive left-wing white saviours. Anti-gentrification and anti-eviction. We need to reorganise our neoliberal property relations. Squats for the rich and a high-interest mortgage for the poor, just before they decolonise us all. So now I'm going to read a section from an essay which is exploring housing and the issues of housing in Melbourne. And that's the William Barrack building, if you're wondering. It's just come up. So similarly to Auckland and I think a lot of cities, housing is a massive issue in Melbourne, as in Sydney, and affordability and being priced out. And I've noticed there's just been a huge public debate and discussion, and that discussion overwhelmingly has been led by the white middle class, which is really ironic because they're the most likely to be able to navigate the crisis. So yeah, I'll read a little section from this essay. In 2015, I was lucky enough to see UN architect Linda Kennedy speak at Resistance Rising, honouring Lex Wotton's work to end deaths in custody. Her arresting speech detailed the rundown social housing flat her family were allocated growing up in Wollongong. The cheaply cladded exterior and poor design was suffocating, but her speech was not about injustice or eliciting the audience sympathy. Instead, her place was the inspiration for her career and what motivated her to start thinking about design as a young child. She instinctively knew that their home was not appropriate for her family's situation, encouraging her own curiosity about design, space and place, which drew her to pursue a career in architecture. She now runs Future Black, a design studio which advocates for and practices an overall shift in the design process, to place Black ways of knowing and doing and as an integral priority. Lacking self-pity, she's an example that we can experience challenging living conditions and use this as motivation for change. Many other Aboriginal women I know have faced similar housing problems, particularly single mothers. At the 2017 Place, Politics and Privilege conference at VU, Victoria University, a white Australian student presented on gentrification in Footscray. She talked about being priced out of a suburb with which she had developed a creative connection and sense of community. Two Aboriginal women in the room quickly addressed her privilege, reminding her of the irony of feeling displaced on land that was never ceded. One of the women shared her own story of housing affordability in Footscray. She'd been ignored by estate agents at inspections, asked to leave and had numerous applications rejected. When she called one real estate agent for more information on rejection, they simply told her that the client didn't want an Aboriginal woman with kids living in their house. In the field of urban planning, there are attempts to address these issues, but the white middle classes are often the first to obstruct social equity initiatives. Most recently, state government's Towards Home program, providing rough sleepers with housing and support services, was met with severe opposition when a site in Brighton East was selected. The area was chosen for its transport connections and close proximity to a range of health and social amenities. But residents were outraged, fearing a barrage of criminals and plummeting property prices. The CBD is awash with shopping trolleys and mattresses flung together in makeshift shelter as people reconfigure doorways for the night. But the situation elicits little sympathy for those safely tucked away in the leafy suburbs of Melbourne, fearful of change. Australia clings to the idea that we are all equal and a house is in arm's reach. While white millennials are starting to shatter the narrative with a range of hard luck stories, the housing industry remains slow to respond, lacking the transformative vision to radically rethink housing. The Andrews Labor government recently announced their platform to make renting fair, with a package of tenancy reforms, such as abolishing rental bidding, long-term leases, and bonds capped at 1 month's rent. While these initiatives will improve conditions and create stability for those unable to purchase their own home, they do little to address structural disadvantage and the racism that continues to impact Indigenous communities and people of colour. The reform did include an end to discrimination against renters with pets, but there was little on offer for those who experienced discrimination according to their race. Having worked in urban policy for several years, the situation isn't surprising. In one workplace, a wall of white men was erected outside the still conventionally gendered female toilets in the office. The series of portraits celebrating Victoria's first land surveyors was a comical reminder of the void we operate in. Women in the office started to joke about the wall, but there was nothing humorous about the structural whiteness that grips the industry. Having read a range of housing policy filled with directions around increasing diversity of stock, improving social housing, co-housing and long-term leases, nothing directly supports Aboriginal people. Although a range of remote housing strategies specific to Northern Queensland, Western Australia and the Northern Territory exist, there seems little to address Aboriginal housing and homelessness in urban Melbourne. Walking down Smith Street and around Fitzroy, an array of bespoke burger joints, boutique retail and pop-ups dominate the landscape, but the presence of Aboriginal people remains. As Uncle Jack Charles has said, the Builder's Arms in Fitzroy was crucial on his pathway back to his family. It was there that he connected with other mob, leading him back to his sisters. Victorian Aboriginal people have a unique cultural connection to Fitzroy, which makes it particularly painful to get approached by mob asking for money outside the juice bars and artist-run spaces, which used to be Aboriginal health services. When artists complain that they've been pushed out of the inner north, I wonder whether they understand the impact change has had on the Aboriginal community. In the 2002 article, Fitzroy Lowlife and the Invasion of the Home Renovator, Tony Birch writes, "It is clear, but again often ignored, that working-class Koori and migrant groups were more likely to be displaced by home renovators and political evangelicals than by government bulldozers. Councils like the City of Yarra are doing their bit, creating a plaque to commemorate the stolen generation and being the first to ban Australia Day celebrations on the 26th of January. But there is little action when it comes to housing, a step that is vital to resolve ongoing injustices. In the obituary biographical production, Jack Charles versus the Crown, Jack Charles attributes his social housing flat in Northcote as the turning point he needed to break the cycle of drug and alcohol addiction. Secure housing and a home provides the stability to transform people's lives. But we continue to listen to the loudest voices in the housing crisis debate, neglecting those who are at most risk. In June 2016, Aboriginal Housing Victoria and the Victorian Aboriginal Community-controlled health organisation made a joint submission to All Things Considered, exploring option for Victoria's 30-year strategy. A critical document that outlines how infrastructure will support our future growth. Their submission illustrated the ongoing disparity between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Victorians, stating that future strategies must recognise the work that still needs to be done to bring Aboriginal Victorians in line with current norms and standards of living for the rest of the community. The urgency is evident in the growing population. Between the 2006 and 2011 census, the Victorian Aboriginal population grew by 26%, with an average annual growth rate of 4.7%, compared to only 1.7% for the general community. By 2022, the ABS predicts that the Victorian Aboriginal population will be over 75,000. The submission identified that 22% of Victorian Aboriginal households are in social or public housing, and with rising population growth, homelessness and housing outcomes are likely to deteriorate or at least not improve. The statistics are alarming, yet the broader discourse is remiss to the injustices facing First Nations people. Aboriginal Housing Victoria is pushing for change, which puts our community back into secure long-term homes. It identifies the need to encourage and/or induce local councils to make available space, specifically for affordable housing for the Victorian Aboriginal community. Given the statistics, increasing housing stock is an important next step. However, reading a range of other state and local government strategies, it is exasperating to see how little is prioritised for Indigenous communities. While delivering social and affordable housing for Indigenous people is complex, requiring both government and the private sector to work together, it is not impossible either. As Melbourne continues to struggle with housing affordability, there are and should be opportunities to reshift the current focus of our housing strategies and re-centre Aboriginal communities in our search for a home. Thank you.